My name is Jan Harzan. I'm the Executive Director for MUFON. We are a scientific research organization that basically collects sighting reports from the public and then goes and investigates them. Our mission statement as an organization is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity, and we have three primary goals. We investigate UFO reports, we promote research into the UFO subject, and we educate the public on our findings. We have 3,000 members worldwide. Many scientists, physicists, PhDs, metallurgists, biologists, all the way down to just the average citizen who really wants to get involved. Some of those have chosen to become field investigators, and they go through our field investigative training courses. They become part of the team in their state or country where they reside, and they actually get engaged in going out and meeting this phenomena head on. We've recently formed a science review board, and that board is made up of scientists from around the United States and around the world to review some of our more significant cases and try to render an opinion on them. What we'd like to do is be more outbound, more outspoken in terms of the really true UFO cases. So MUFON is moving forward with this approach, and we'll be publishing papers in these different areas to allow the general public and even the scientific community to be able to be challenged by what we're finding. That's the strength of MUFON as an organization, is being really the truth seekers of the UFO field.
I'm going to do something unprecedented. I'm going to do something unheard of. This morning I'm going to step over the thin blue line and turn my back on my fellow colleagues in law enforcement and tell you how to get out of a ticket. Hey, this is serious biz, all right? And I'm going to use the example of a young lady in the city of Aurora. She woke up one morning and decided that she was going to drive 1 mile an hour for every day or for every year that she'd been on this planet, which was pretty cool. So she's going to get in her bright red Mercedes convertible and do 1 mile an hour for every birthday that she had on this planet. She was 91. The second problem was that she decided to do it in a 55 mile an hour posted speed zone. Sure enough, she gets popped by an officer with a laser. By the way, folks, if you get hit with laser, stick a fork in you, you're done. That is one accurate instrument. It will nail you down to the microsecond. Well, anyway, he pulls her over. He goes up to her and does the, ma'am, I need to see your driver's license, registration, proof of insurance. She goes, oh, officer, she says, I lost my driver's license after my third DUI hit and run accident. Okay. Can I see the registration for this nice new Mercedes? And she goes, well, it's not really my car, I stole it. He goes, what? He goes, yeah, officer, I just wanted one and I stole it. And the owner's in the trunk, I had to kill him in order to get it. Well, by this time, the officer's backing up, drawing his weapon, calling for backup. His supervisor arrives, his sergeant. Says, what's going on? He tells him, says, hey, doesn't have a driver's license, 3 DUI hit and run accidents, not her car, it's stolen. And she says the owner's in the trunk that she killed. So the sergeant warily approaches the lady and says, ma'am, you don't have a driver's license? She goes, well, yeah, sergeant, here it is right here. Looks at it and looks back at the officer and says, is this your car? She goes, yeah, I've owned it for 2 years. Here's the registration and the insurance. So he's looking at it and looking back at the officer like, what the heck's going on here? He goes, ma'am, do you mind if I take a look in the trunk? And she goes, no, not at all, Sergeant. Can I ask what the problem is? And he goes, well, supposedly you said that you killed the owner and you've got him in the trunk. And she looks at the sergeant and she goes, yeah, and I bet that lying bastard said I was speeding too. Hey, try it. If you get away with it, let me know. Cops and flying saucers. Law enforcement's been involved in the UFO problem probably as long, if not longer, before the Air Force and the government was involved in it, because that's the one agency that people can contact, the one government agency that people can contact. And not only will we answer the phone, but we'll send somebody out to talk to you. There are several good examples of cops involved with flying saucers, and if you followed this phenomena or this problem, I'm sure you're aware of it. Lonnie Zamora was a police officer down in New Mexico. Excellent case. I think Ted Phillips worked on that case. Val Johnson was another officer up in Warren, Minnesota, I believe it was. His encounter ruined his career. And that brings me to another point. For a law enforcement officer, and myself included, this is not a career-enhancing problem. If you're unlucky enough to have an encounter, or you get dispatched to an encounter, it can literally ruin your career. And there have been several instances where officers have been forced to either retire or resign from the profession because of what happened to them. A lot of criticism and ridicule comes down on the officer because we're looked upon, and rightly so, as credible and trustworthy. And somehow, if an officer gets embroiled in a encounter, he or she all of a sudden loses their credibility. They're no longer trustworthy. And inside the department, the ridicule can be really intense. And I've experienced that firsthand. Fortunately, I can give it out as good as I can take. I think my sense of humor, if you haven't gathered by now, gets me through a lot of difficult times. The first case that I'm going to talk to you about is eyewitness testimony. There are no pictures, there is no forensic evidence. The eyewitness is a police officer. Now, skeptics will tell you, or they're quick to point out, that eyewitness testimony is unreliable. And I'm here to tell you that's a bunch of crap. Now, eyewitnesses may make mistakes. They may be inaccurate in certain details. They may not even be able to pick out the suspect in a photo lineup. But the fact remains that they witnessed something very traumatic, and certain details are accurate. And it's a starting point for an investigator. You have an eyewitness to an event. Tom Bobay was a Jefferson County Sheriff's deputy when I joined the Sheriff's Department back in 1978. He had been a Sheriff's deputy for a number of years before I got there. In fact, he became my training officer. I had not met him prior to. He ended up being a very good friend of mine. In fact, he was best man at my wedding. So that tells you how the relationship progressed over the years. The story that I'm about to relate to you took me 3 years to get the story out of him because he endured some incredible ridicule. In fact, he was threatened with his job by the sheriff, who at that time was Harold Bray of Jefferson County, Colorado. My interest in the UFO problem, I was involved in it long before I became a law enforcement officer. So that first day that I arrived, and I was a rookie, as they refer to as a newbie, and I was assigned to Deputy Bobay as his trainee. Never met the man before in my life. Now let me give you some background on him so you get a feel for his personality. Tom was a rodeo. He was a cowboy. He rode the PRC in his off-duty hours. He rode bulls. In fact, that gentleman convinced me that I needed to climb up on a bull. And I did for 1.5 seconds. But he did that on his off time. Now, if you know anything about cowboys and rodeo riders, they're a very conservative lot. Cops in general are very conservative. We're not very liberal-minded, and we hate change. And so Tom was not one to give to fantasy. He was a person that there were nights when he was training me, he maybe had said 100 words in a 12-hour shift. And keep in mind, I spent more time with him than I did with my wife. We were working 70, maybe 80 hours a week for the Sheriff's Department, 12-hour shifts. So I spent a lot of time with him. It took me 3 years to get this story out of him. First day that I showed up as a trainee, the other deputies were in the squad room. I get introduced to Tom, and right away there were some snide remarks. Hey, Tom, you gonna show them what the aliens look like? And you could just see the red come up on his face. Well, we got in the car, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm gonna ask him. And I did, and he looked over at me and he goes, newbie, don't talk to me, I'll talk to you, and we are not going to discuss this. And we didn't for 3 years. 3 years I worked with this man. He never said a word what happened. Then one morning we were sitting up at Lookout Mountain, excuse me, and we were talking what guys usually talk about, girls, horses, okay, girls. And out of the blue, he looked over at me, and we were parked. I'm sure you've seen cops. They park, we call it heel to toe, and that's how we were parked up on Lookout Mountain. It was about 5:30 in the morning. He was sipping on his coffee, and he finally took the chew out of his mouth and spit it out the window, and he looked at me and he goes, you know, I saw him. I looked and I go, you saw what? And he goes, I saw the beans. He goes, I never said anything to the Air Force or the sheriff about it. And here's the story. One evening, Tom gets a call from the dispatch. It says, you need to go to a ranch up off of Windy Point, 285. For those that are not familiar with it, that's in Jefferson County. If you go up 285 now, it's a 4-lane highway, and there's a sign there that says Windy Point. Well, the ranch was located up in that area. Dispatcher tells Tom, ranchers, and by the way, this predates 911. Jefferson County didn't have 911 back then. But the rancher had called the sheriff's dispatcher and says, hey, I need a deputy up here right now because someone's trying to steal my horse and burn the barn down, and I'm shooting at him. Now, that's how the call came out. Sounds serious. So Tom gets up there to the rancher, and the rancher tells him, I think it was a helicopter. But they were shining a light down on the barn, and one of the horses ran out of the barn, and they were trying to get my horse in the corral. Now, it's very important, and I'm going to come back to that on my next case that I want to talk about. Tom said, well, you know, the who, what, where, and why questions that an officer asks. And he says, the rancher tells him he thought it was some kind of military craft and that it went southwest over the hill. He tells Tom, hey, I shot at it with my .30-30 rifle. Tom said, well, did you hit it? And the rancher goes, I don't know. It looked like it was going down over the hill. It may have crashed. So he followed 285 up the Foxton Road. And then you go south off of Foxton Road down to the South Fork of the Platte River. Back then, it was just a 1-lane gravel road, barely passable by 2 cars. If you held your breath, you could get 2 vehicles to go by. Now it's a 4-lane blacktop, and there's houses everywhere. But back then, it was remote. Tom goes down over Foxton Road. He says he's driving down the road. He comes around the corner, and here's an object, approximately 2-story tall house with an attached garage, is how he described it, hovering about 20 feet off the ground. Tom's within about 200 feet of it. He says the top portion of it is rotating counterclockwise, the bottom portion of it's rotating clockwise, and he said it was bright enough that I could see movement in the lights. And he's looking at me when he's telling me this. And he goes, Ken, I saw them. And of course my question was, well, what the hell did they look like? And he said, all I can tell you is that they walked upright on 2 legs and they had arms. And he said there were a couple of them pointing at me. The craft slowly lifted up, disappeared over the hills down towards Kenosha Pass, if you're familiar with that, and that was the last of it. The Sheriff's Department had a policy, and it was in effect when I joined them, and that is every call that you went on, you had to do a written report. If you were dispatched to it, you'd put pen to paper. And so Tom was obligated to write a report. Big mistake. Because when that hit the news, and it did, there were reporters questioning him. There was a lot of phone calls into the Sheriff's Department. Allegedly, 2 Air Force officers showed up and interviewed Tom. They had him draw a sketch of what he saw. They also had the rancher draw a sketch of what he shot at. Ironically, the Air Force took both sketches with them, but Tom got a chance to see the rancher sketch before they left the room, and it was almost identical to the one he had sketched. And what he saw basically was two inverted saucers on top of one another, plates. Sheriff Harold Bray became so irate with Tom that he threatened him with his job. He told him, "Don't you ever, ever do that again." And yet Tom was following policy and procedure. He was obligated to write a report. It's kind of a catch-22 for him. He took a lot of flack from not only the sheriff, his boss, but a lot of his cohorts that he worked with, plus in the community. I mean, everybody in Jefferson County that heard about it and knew Tom, he couldn't walk into a restaurant at one point without somebody making a comment. And like I said, Tom was a very quiet and shy guy. It's a pretty incredible story. I always wanted to put him on camera, and I wanted to interview him, and he wouldn't do it. He said if he ever saw another object like that again in his life, he'll take it to his grave. He's not going to say a word, just because of the stress that he went through. And it was obvious when he was telling the story that he was still under stress. It was very difficult for him to relate that to me, but we had become very close in 3 years, and he felt comfortable, and he knew that I wouldn't ridicule him. The next case that I'm going to talk about, and I said I'd come back. Remember I told you about that rancher? The craft was shining a light down on the barn and was chasing one of his horses. When I heard that story, I didn't make the connection, but I think we had an eyewitness to an animal abduction. My partner, and he's here today with the conference, him and I went down to the San Luis Valley. Told you, Murphy's Law. This is my first PowerPoint presentation, so anything that can go wrong will go wrong, guaranteed. We went down to the San Luis Valley. We took an expedition down there to gather information, to investigate cases, and we made contact with the sheriff down in Saguache County. And he said, well, I've got a case for you that you boys might be interested in, and it's a cattle mutilation. The rancher, the night before, had checked his herd. And you'll see in the photographs that the cow has a tag in the ear, I believe it's H01. With his laptop, he could punch up that steer and tell you when it was born, the inoculation, and the state of health of that steer. Hey, ranching is a business. Ranchers depend on it. So this cattle mutilation problem is a serious problem for ranchers. You're going to look at an animal that was worth about $1,500. He checked on the herd that night. The next morning, that herd was about 2.5 miles from the ranch house. The next morning, when the rancher walked out the door with his coffee in his hand, the steer was about 100 feet from his front doorstep. Now, this is not it, okay? And I brought this photograph to demonstrate, like I said, I hope this also helps you understand and is also a learning lecture. Now let's see if I can do this without messing it up. This is a steer that died of natural causes. It was hit by lightning. And what you're looking at, oh sure, see, I told you it wouldn't work. Where's my pointer? Right here. What you're looking at, that is not mutilation. Right there, there, and there. What that is predation. Coyotes and birds have been working on that carcass, and as the skin, I told you, as the skin dries, it shrinks. And so the hole expands. If you look closely, you'll see here's some bones. There's some soft tissue right in here where the coyotes have been going into the stomach, and they have been eating the soft flesh. And they're going to do that first because they can get to it easy, and they will digest it first. Like I say, this is not a cattle mutilation. I show you this one first because the next photograph, you're going to make a stark comparison, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. So, any questions on this, by the way? All right. This is what the rancher saw of his steer when he walked out the next morning. Now, there's a couple of things to point out in this particular case. First of all, there's the H01 that I was talking about. I want you to look closely at the cuts. By the way, can you tell that this is a fresh kill? Yeah, you can eat the meat on this. Okay, there's T-bones on here that are edible. This cow has probably been down for about 5 or 6 hours. Steer, excuse me. There are a couple of things that I need to point out to you. Is number one, if you'll notice, all around here, no blood. Now you're looking at a steer that's approximately anywhere between 600 and 800 pounds. Probably closer to about 700, 750. They contain a lot of liquid. There's none on the ground. By the way, this is how it was found. Let me go to the next case. This next case involves 2 police officers in Anchorage, Alaska. The year is 1965 or 67, 65. They're in a helicopter. The pilot's a police officer for the Anchorage PD. The cameraman is a crime scene technician who's also a police officer. They're up there doing a aerial survey and photograph. They had a serious crime that occurred just east of Anchorage, and so they were doing a photograph overlay. I believe it was a homicide. I'm not sure, but I think that was the specific case and the reason why they were up there. So they were taking an overview of the ground. They were also employed by the Bureau of Land Management to do some aerial surveying. The Bureau of Land Management was going to expand the boundaries of the territory, so they wanted some pictures. So that's the reason why these 2 officers were up in the air. Now, the officer that took the picture and the pilot have died. They're deceased. But I have the negative of the photographs that they took. After the officer after the 2 officers took the photograph, they never said a word. They put the negatives in a safe deposit box, and that's where they remained until the year 2000. And the son of one of the police officers approached me and told me the story and gave me the negative. And the reason why the officers never said anything, by the way, that's not uncommon. I know of 4 incidences right now in my own department, and the officers won't talk about it. Not to me, not to anybody, but I know something happened. I've heard the dispatch tapes when the citizens called in that there's an object hovering over their house. So this officer puts the negative in a safe deposit box, and it remains there until he passes away, and his wife was going to destroy it. She was going to throw it in the fireplace, and the son said, no, don't do it. And ultimately contacted me and gave me the photograph. Now, the first one that you're going to see is, this is inside the helicopter. I believe this is the Yukon River, just east of Anchorage. And this is the windscreen of the chopper. This object here, I had the negative looked at professionally, and it's estimated that this object right here is 5 miles from the lens camera. All right? Now, we're able to determine that the helicopter is approximately 1,500 feet in the air, and that's because we're able to, all right, told you, Murphy's Law. The size of the trees, was able to make a determination that it's approximate, that the helicopter is approximately 1,500 feet in the air. Now, the story that was relayed to the son from his dad was that if you look closely, you can see that there's some cloud cover. And he caught movement out of the corner of his eye, and thinking that it was another plane, was telling the pilot that, hey, we've got another plane in our airspace, and then, of course, this object came out of the clouds. 5 miles from the camera lens, was able to make a rough estimate what the size of this thing that you're looking at. And it's equivalent to a mile-high stadium. You could probably get 50, 60,000 people in there. So that gives you an idea of how big this craft is. Here's the second photograph. He zoomed in on it. That's the second photograph that he snapped before the object disappeared. Now, I've had numerous people look at this under a magnifying glass and they go, oh, that's a bolt with a washer through it. Okay, it may look like that to you, but this officer, and that's probably one of the reasons why he put it in the safety deposit box, because he didn't want to go down that road and have to stand tall in front of people ridiculing him for something that he had no control over. But if you look closely, it's not a bolt or a washer. There's thickness to it. There's something up on top of it, but you can't really see what it is. I would like to take that negative and have it enlarged and looked at and analyzed scientifically, but once again, we're talking cost. And the chief won't give me any special funding for it. But this case illustrates a couple of things. And number one is that when I got into researching and investigating this problem, there were certain career fields that I thought should be reporting it. One was pilots, and they do. One was ranchers, and they do. And the other one was law enforcement. And the reason why is because these career fields are the ones that are out and about every day. You're not going to be able to see an unidentified object sitting here in this auditorium. You have to be out in the field. I think it was NICAP did a study on career fields, and law enforcement and pilots and ranchers were ranked right up there, and understandably so. And I think that's what also gives it credibility, this problem, is that these are the very people that you would expect to see something unusual, unidentified. And they are. There's a close-up of the craft. And like I said, if you look closely at the top, you can see that there's some kind of definition up there. I have no idea what that is, but it has thickness to it. This is where people tell me, they go, well, that's nothing but a washer with a bolt through it. Well, it's not. It may look like it, and I can see where they come up with that analysis. But the initial, like I said, it was determined that the object, whatever it is 5 miles from the camera lens, and probably at about 10,000 feet. So however that officer was able to get that washer and that bolt 5 miles from his camera lens at 10,000 feet, my hat's off to him. So, and I love this one. I like Fireside. I can't help it, but you know, it may be not too far from the truth. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm willing to entertain any questions, comments, or whatsoever concerning it. So thank you very much, and appreciate it. Thank you.